Welcome to episode 7 of the Re-Automated podcast. Today I'm joined by Jake Hall, the manufacturing millennial himself. Jake, thanks for joining us.
Chris, man, it's great to talk to you again. We're doing like recording 2.0. I love it.
Yes, and you're the consummate podcasting professional here, so thanks for joining us. We're excited to have you on. I think you are probably more informed about generational statistics than any other person I know when it comes to the manufacturing sector, so I'm happy to have you on today and share some of your experience.
Thanks for having me.
So let's jump right into it. Who is the manufacturing millennial?
Yeah, I guess to start with who is the manufacturing millennial, it would be good to talk about where it got started. So I've been in the manufacturing industry for 17 years. I started working for a manufacturer when I was in high school. I worked for a small company at the time called JR Automation. They're a lot bigger now these days,
Yeah.
but back when I was working for them, I was employee 100 something. And it was a lot of fun. I would say I did a lot of the grunt work at the time. A industry legend, Scott Litteman, was the guy that hired me into the industry, and I swept the floors, I cleaned the machine, the manual mills and the machines. I grinded down a lot of steel going into welding, and it allowed me to learn on what the basis of manufacturing was. At the same time, kind of put it in the time, which I think is important. Was involved with high school robotics. I went to Grand Valley. I got a manufacturing engineering degree and a couple of other things, and went to go work for an automation distributor, which really opened up my eyes to the diversity of what manufacturing is. And I think that's really ignited why I love this industry so much, is because working for a distributor, you get to see so many different applications and so many different industries. It was a lot of fun. But when I was a part of that distributor, I went to an organization called AHTD.
I'm familiar. Yes, the what is that? It's Automated High Tech Distributors or something like that?
Association of High Technology Distributors, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's where a lot of the big high technology automation distributors across the U.S. and there's some in Mexico as well, and Canada, are part of it to learn about the latest trends. So I went to one of these events in like 2018, 2019, I think, and they were talking about making change in your industry, and I thought it was a little silly at the time where they're talking about making change and attracting the next generation. Yet when I looked across the crowd at the time, I was probably the only person there under the age of 40 that was attending that association. I'm thinking, well, geez, we want to bring this next generation on board. We want to bring people, yet the leaderships and associations that are there don't have young people a part of it. So I figured, well, I'm a millennial. I love manufacturing. I'm now being to be, the outspoken millennial, and call myself the manufacturing millennial, be unapologetic for it. Went home and did absolutely nothing for, as a result of that for a couple years. And then in 2020, when the pandemic hit and all of a sudden we were all forced to work from home, I figured, well, now's a great time to hop on social media. And since I can't see all of my customers in person anymore, and emails and video calls are going to get boring real quick. I'm just going to start filming content, and I'm going to start, talking about products, talking about the problems in the industry, talk about my experiences from a millennial and the culture that we face as an industry. Just because I'm in front of my computer a lot more instead of being in person and on the road. So I started creating and sharing content around manufacturing, and I would say making it short and engaging, and following I guess you could say, the models that make social media successful, and then apply that to the business world and the manufacturing world. And over that period of time, I've grown thousands of followers and millions of views, where now the manufacturing millennial is a full-time gig for me. I get to travel around the US doing a lot of keynote presentations, advocating for new technology, new automation, how AI is going to be impacting our workforce, but more importantly, how all those tools, as I call them, will impact the future workforce, and how we can leverage technology and robots and AI to attract the next generation of millennials and now Gen Zs into the industry. So, yeah, that's kind of who the manufacturing millennial is now. I'm a massive advocate for manufacturing, automation, skilled trades, and how all these different, I guess you could say, career paths that people could take can all drive success within manufacturing and those industries.
Cool. So you started scrubbing floors at JR. you worked your way through the distribution network and experiencing a lot of different customer intimacy, and then you became an expert by really focusing on it and going full time. Very, very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. I mean, during that time, I also missed a spot. So I left a distributor in 2020, and we went to go work for a systems integrator at the time, and we were acquired by another company. And at that time, we were one of the world's largest SCADA and MES deployers in the world. I mean, so we were a $1 billion company, hundreds and hundreds of engineers. So I was in business development for them. Had some phenomenal. Customers and applications. I think in 1 year I visited over 200 manufacturers. Excuse me. In 1 year I visited over like 150 manufacturers in 1 year. A lot of road time, a
It's a
lot of
lot. Yeah.
manufacturers. And granted, if people never been to West Michigan, you could literally hop in your car and visit, 5 different manufacturers in a morning.
Yes.
I think my typical I guess you could call it sales milk run when I was a distributor. I was visiting 35 different manufacturers in a week, which so for some people, like that's crazy, especially for a lot of places. It's like, an hour drive from one to one. It's, one right next door to the next one. But, it was one of those things where, yeah, I got a lot of experience seeing how manufacturers are solving problems and at the same time, the problems that they're facing, as our industry continues to evolve.
Very good. So, Jake, last time we talked, which I think was 2 years ago on a different podcast, there was a statistic thrown out there that manufacturing in the United States, if you were to take that and make it its own country,
Yeah.
just the GDP of that, it would be like the seventh largest country in the world,
Yeah.
so to speak. So,
Yeah.
what I love about you in particular is you're not just a brand who's resharing content on LinkedIn or Instagram or something like that to get views. You do contribute a lot of really unique statistics to both your in-person talks and also on podcasts like this. So I'm interested to find out, what are your sources? How do you find out some of this cool stuff and wrap that into the narrative?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of that research that's being done out there is not being done by me, right? My whole, I guess you could say, enchilada is going out there and finding the statistics and making them relevant and exciting to people, right? It's one of those things. Yeah, we're manufacturing a 2.3 to 2.5 trillion dollar industry this year. We don't know the exact numbers yet, but it's gonna be around that size, and that makes it the seventh largest GDP if it was own country. But a lot of that, information will come from A3 or IFR, the International Federation of Robotics, or a lot of the time I spend on the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. I mean, it's or there's so many other great organizations like NAST, or every state has their own manufacturing extension partnership program. There's a lot of great data and resources that are out there that I feel like can truly help manufacturers open up their eyes on the impact, except a lot of times it's not shared well, or it's not made relevant. And I think,
Contextualized.
I think that's what say that kind of made my move within manufacturing, and I see a lot of people doing this now, is making manufacturing short, or I guess you could say exciting, engageable, and educational, right? And if you can encompass those three things and consuming in under 60 seconds, it drives a lot of value, right? Because I want people to be excited about manufacturing. I want people to be engaged by it, and I want people to feel like they're learning something new. So it's one of those things where I'm not out there having a team of researchers grab that data. I'm just trying to make that data exciting and relevant to why it matters. And I think that just that type of, I guess you could say, um, motivation can then be directly related to manufacturers trying to attract this next generation of showing why manufacturing matters to a lot of people.
Very good. So, succinctly, maybe can you explain what your thesis is on manufacturing and demographics and generational gaps?
Yeah, I mean, so within manufacturing right now, it's so unique because there's 4 different generations right now that are really working in manufacturing, or will be very soon. We have the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, the millennials, and the Gen Zs. And then, my girls right now, who are, I think, the Gen Alphas, that will be in manufacturing in the next, 10, 15 years. What we're seeing from all this data is, when you look at generational trends, each generational trend has a different outlook on the way they want to work, the way they how they want to work, where they want to work, and it can kind of be broken down into baby boomers. Baby boomers have a really unique characteristic where they're very loyal to their job. We could think of, our grandparents, when we hear the stories of our grandparent worked at the same company for 44 years, right? You look at the data, the average baby boomer is going to have 3 different jobs their entire career. Their entire career, they're going to work at 3 different companies. Yet when we look at millennials, for example, the average millennial is going to have 11 different jobs by the age of 30. Like a
Wow.
completely different way of working in that area. So all of a sudden, we need to realize that this idea of corporate loyalty or company loyalty doesn't exist anymore. And I think it's one of those things where I would say it was a fault to a lot of manufacturers at the time, where they would get a person, they'd work at the company, and they would just stay there, and they really wouldn't have to worry about the culture or the motivation to keep them there. But they're finding out really quickly that if a person doesn't want to work there, they just don't work there anymore. I mean, quiet quitting is like one of the biggest trends that we saw, in 2023 when it came to like TikTok or Instagram, where it was all over the news, quiet quitting. So what we're seeing now is that younger generations aren't loyal to the company. They're more loyal to their own personal life or their family or their kids, right? We see now through, younger generations of millennials, they're like, you know what? If I can't be with my family, if I can't go and coach my daughter's soccer team or her t-ball team, I'm not going to necessarily give up on home life dedication as much as I'll just find a different job that works differently. And we're seeing that now through the trends of younger generations through flexible work. And I'll give an example of that. Flexible work is one of the highest trends in terms of millennials and the way they want to work these days, right? The 8 to 5 is, while it's not necessarily dying, it's changing and evolving. And I'll give an example of that. We hear, right? We're both younger millennials. I'm 34. How old are you, Chris?
I'm 32.
32. Okay, yeah. So
My
we're
birthday
both.
was actually yesterday.
Oh
So
man, happy birthday! Yeah, awesome, man. Well,
yeah.
I mean, but when we think of what a lot of people our age do, is they're having job opportunities that exist now that didn't exist 10 years ago. And I think the biggest thing that we hear of all the time is that millennials are entitled. Millennials want this. They want this now. They don't want to put in the work. They expect a lot of money right away. But I think the thing that, like, when I'm going around and I'm giving presentations and giving keynotes, is I drive them to think that millennials are not entitled. They're just simply aware of all the other opportunities that exist
They're
today
connected.
that
Yeah.
didn't exist 10 years ago, right? Uber, Grubhub,
All these
Lyft,
platforms. Yep.
all of these digital based working platforms, which you have flexible work, exist now, right? So if I can go out there and I don't want to work on a Friday because I partied really hard on a Thursday, I just don't show up to work. You know what? Saturday, then I'm going to have to log into the app and I'm going to have to drive for 10 hours to get paid $25 an hour. Or, hey, I need a little bit of extra cash. Well, I'm going to hop on my app and go onto Amazon Flex, and I'm going to figure out, I'm going to deliver 85 packages with my own personal car tonight. I'm going to go to the distribution center. I'm going to figure out, it's going to take me about 3 hours. I'm going to get paid $82 to work for those 3 hours, and then I'm done, and I don't have to work. So all of a sudden, it's one of those things where younger generations are seeing the value with flexible work that they didn't see before. And I think,
So how do you remedy that against manufacturing, which does require structure, process, consistent hours? I mean, manufacturers have to be consistent by the nature of what they do, right?
I
So does
think
that
that,
just
yeah, no, you're absolutely right with that, which gets to my next point. The current generations that we know, especially a lot in their early 20s, late 20s, right? They're still probably on their parents' healthcare, right? And I think that's just the biggest thing. When we saw that shift happen, I forgot how many years ago it was when they bumped up when
To
younger kids could stay in their
26 or
parents' health care
27.
for
Yeah.
when was that?
They moved it to like 26 or 27 years
Yeah,
old. They
right.
can
But that
stay on it
happened
too.
what for maybe a little bit long, maybe it
During
was
Obama. Yeah.
yeah, during the Obama administration, right? So all of a sudden, the motivation for young kids to go out and get jobs with benefits was dropped in a lot of cases. So all of a sudden you have 20-year-olds, some kids right out of high school, and early on in their career, which a lot of times they would go into a manufacturing job, or they would go into a job that was high paying at the time, right? Because manufacturing, compared to other industries across the board, when you look at the mean average, manufacturing is still one of the better paying jobs hour per hour on a payroll basis. But all of a sudden you're realizing that these young kids don't see the value in benefits beyond just the immediate paycheck that they get, right? They're just focused on, what do I get now versus what is the investment down the road. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the failure of, I don't want to put pressure back on the educational system, but right, we're so focused on education now, learning the basics of 4 years of math, 4 years of science, 4 years of English, 4 years, of history. When was the last time we took a taxes class in high school, or a shop class in high school, or a household, thing in high school, where all of a sudden you realize what compound interest does when you have a 401k when you start at 22 years old, the value behind that. And that's just one of those things that this next generation isn't getting taught. So therefore, when they can go out there and just get immediate gratification of getting the money, they don't look at what benefits can have in terms of, a 401k or a health plan or a pension plan, or even long-term educational growth opportunities, right? People don't think of, hey, if I go work for a manufacturer, and I just toured one last week for Discover Manufacturing, and I want to talk about that later on in this conversation. They pay their students up to $12,500 per year for reimbursement for educational things. It doesn't matter if you're going to go get a 4-year degree in engineering, or if you're attending local community college in a skilled trades to become a welder or an electrician or a
That's
machinist.
much more than the federal kind of tax incentive of 5250. So that's
Yeah.
great. That's more than double what most manufacturers or even most companies will be able to give you,
Yeah.
just based off the federal law.
And it's amazing that way that we're seeing that, but at the same time, when kids who are in high school graduating, they simply are not aware of those benefits that are out there, right? Because if you're going out there and you're talking, right, the most influential people for a junior or senior who are graduating high school are going to be their friends, their parents, and their teachers, right? And if it's not trendy, they're probably not going to do it because their friends aren't, excited about it, right? If their parents aren't aware of it, or the parents still have this um basis, or this misconception that manufacturing is this dark, dirty, dull, dangerous industry that their grandparents used to work, that they saw them working extra hours, working on Saturdays, jobs left America, left manufacturing, went over to other countries in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Why would they want their kids to be a part of the industry? So all of a sudden, parents are encouraging it. And let's face it, when you go to, a lot of times, if there's not a vocational school or vocational program within the high school itself, you're going to have a lot of guidance counselors and teachers who are saying, no, you have to go get a 4-year degree. The next step after you graduate high school is you go get a 4-year degree. It doesn't matter if you graduate with $40,000 in student debt. It's just something you should go and do. And I think we're seeing now a shift where people are realizing that college or a 4-year degree isn't for everyone, and it shouldn't be for everyone. But it just goes back down to answer your question, earlier, Chris, on what we're seeing with these generations. I would say the way success was, the way you could define success and the path you had to take 30 years ago is not what it is today. So the way we communicate that and the way we have to do that change is different now.
So, what would you say to manufacturers for advice to get them to help attract younger generations? Is it a matter of branding? Is it some kind of HR practice? Is it something else?
Yeah, I would say there's the big thing that we need to realize as manufacturers is, unless you're a massive enterprise, right, that's on mainstream I guess you could say,
A brand name, like a
yeah,
really household
yeah,
name, kind
a
of.
brand name, right? People want to go work for Tesla because Tesla's a brand name. People want to go work
Right.
for SpaceX because SpaceX is a brand
Sexy.
name. People want aerospace, great. They're going to go work for Lockheed Martin or Boeing or whoever. But let's face it, when we look at the numbers, 98.6% of manufacturers in the United States classify as a small to medium sized business.
Wow.
78% of all business, all
What are
manufacturers.
the bands on that, Jake? Like,
Yeah,
what is
so
an
so
SME band?
78% of manufacturers are a small business, which classifies under 50 employees, and then a medium-sized business, I believe, is between 50 and 500.
Wow.
Maybe it's 15 and 1,000. I'd have to go and look at that. But when you look at it, still the massive scale percentages is most businesses across the United States are a small to medium size, business. And small to medium sized businesses most of the time are reliant on local talent, local resources, local people coming to work for them, right? A small machine shop or a contract plastics injection manufacturer isn't going to be pulling talent 1,000 miles away for them to come and work for them. It's just not going to happen. But where the talent is it's local, it's in the community. So I think we often fail as an industry realizing that we have all these manufacturing companies, yet they're not integrated or reaching the local communities of younger generations, but also of the parents. And so what we need to do as manufacturers is we need to engage more locally. We need to one, bust the misconceptions that manufacturing is this dark industry, this dirty industry that exists for people. Granted, yes, you walk into a casting facility or a facility that's spraying mold release every time a die closes before they pull
Yeah.
molten
It's
aluminum.
nasty.
Yes, that is dirty. It's never going to be welcome to drive through Gary, Indiana, which is one of the largest steel producers in the US. Yeah, it is dirty, but you know what? You're not going to drive in your car. You're not going to have a house. You're not going to have that if that industry doesn't exist. But for a lot of other cases with the manufacturing is a very clean industry now. And allowing kids and parents to understand what manufacturing has to offer is critical now. So, like, I'll give you a couple examples of what we're doing in here in West Michigan, where I'm at. So, starting last week and going through this week, we have a program through West Michigan Works and a couple of other allies called Discover Manufacturing. And our whole goal with this, and there's a bunch of videos, and maybe if you guys release a video, I'll send you some links where you can read this as part of the thing.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
We'll
Yep.
put it in the show notes where I toured 13 different manufacturers with high school students this last 2 weeks to go into facilities, to walk on the floor, to talk to their engineers, to talk to their HR, to talk to their talent teams on why they should come and work for those companies. So we put kids on their school buses, pulled them out of class, and walked into that. So during these 2 weeks, we're hoping to get somewhere between 8 to 10,000 high school students inside manufacturers doing that 2 week period.
That's a lot. Yeah.
And so, like, how do you make change? You be the change, right? You want to bring fresh talent on board, then you need to go physically get that talent and bring it into your company to do it. So, like, that's one example. Another example that we're doing that's happening next year is called My Career Quest. So we're going to bring in about another 9,000 students. And these are going to be middle school students here in West Michigan at a local convention center. We're going to bust them in. And so we're going to have 5 different industries. One of those industries is going to be manufacturing that's there. And our whole goal is we're going to have 35 to 40 manufacturing companies. They're going to have a 10 by 10 or a 10 by 20 booth. And they're going to walk the floor and they're going to learn in hands-on experience of what manufacturing has to offer. So, like, that's another example that we're pushing out there. One final one is the career readiness event. So this is happening next year up in Big Rapids, about 45 minutes north of where we are, and we're hoping to bring in 1,000 parents and students onto a campus to meet with manufacturers so the parents can talk directly with the manufacturers on what those programs have to offer to them. That's where change happens. Like, for me, I love creating content on social media and making posts and making videos and going to trade shows. But, like, Where the rubber meets the road is, spending time and going and talking with these parents and having these conversations. And that's what manufacturers need to do. And it doesn't take much for as a manufacturer to go and work with a local high school and say, hey, how do we get a bus from, kids who want to come learn to manufacture and come here for the morning, right? We're going to come
So
out
Jake,
there.
can you name a couple? Can you name drop a couple manufacturers that you maybe, for example, in West Michigan that you think are doing a good job with this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I'll just do a couple that I went on tours with this past week. So one of them was AutoCam Medical. They have one of the programs where, and I'll have a video on this as well. Right, you walk into there, they brought in several, probably over their period of time, 300 or 400 students. AutoCam Medical, they're a really cool medical device manufacturing company, contract manufacturer. Right, you want to make a drill that's going to go in and do surgery. They have hundreds of CNC machines that are being machine tended through robotics that are going out there and doing grinding and deburring and all that stuff. And they have a massive apprenticeship program that's out there. Another one that was really cool was Pridgeon and Clay, another really fun manufacturer. They are the third largest consumer of stainless steel coil in the U.S. Like the third largest. It's
It's a
incredible
lot of raw materials.
how much
Yeah,
raw material they push through. But they have another program as well, where I think they were the one that I mentioned that gives like $10,000 or $12,000 a year to teach those kids. Another one I went to was Bradford White Corp. They're a massive manufacturer of water heaters. I think they use enough steel that would produce 100,000 cars. Massive facility, 1.3 million square feet facility. So it's one of those
so
things.
those are large companies,
Yeah, but
right?
let me
It
give you an
sounds like
example.
they're doing it well. Now we need to try and find a way for smaller
So let me
companies
give you another
to do
example. The
this
first
too.
one I went on was TNR in Berry County, 34 employees, and Tom Watson was the guy there, and he has been involved where he put up a pole barn. Literally, he put up a pole barn and put some old lathes and manual mills in it that teach kids after school how to come and do for that. Now he has probably a dozen kids who graduated from high school who went to his program and did that. It's Tom Watson. It's T and W, or yeah, I think it's T and W. Tom, something Watson
Yeah,
or something.
it's the guy's name.
So
Yeah.
it's one of those things where, yeah, he's not a massive $1 billion corporation. It's Tom, but they make a lot of cool parts and stuff like that, and they're making parts for Tesla and a bunch of other companies. And
It
it's just,
reminds me of some of the small businesses in New England, for example, or Pennsylvania. Yeah, it's like you would be surprised if you trace the supply chain all the way down to
yeah,
mom and pop barns that are making like, Lockheed Martin
yeah,
quality parts or
one
something like
one
that, right?
hundred percent. But it goes to show, right, the scale, right? You have Tom at 30 or 40 employees, and then you have Bradford White, which is several thousand. I mean, so it's the scale of those things that makes it that's what's incredible, right? Because you had massive companies, but then you also had the small machine shop, which they're super excited about because they're going to be putting in their first robot machine tending on a 5-axis next year. So it's one of those things where there's really not an excuse to say, oh, I can't do that because we're not a 500 employee company. No, Tom did it. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
Tom's 60 something. Maybe you're
Yeah.
not. I'm sorry if you,
And
but what I'm
it
saying,
sounds like kind of like the common theme, despite being a large or small or whatever, is the application of cool technology. Even if it's in a barn, the fact is that a lot of high schoolers are good at tech. That's
yeah,
like something that definitively younger generations are good at. And throwing them in front of a CNC machine is a cool problem for them to solve.
absolutely.
Even though it's sometimes archaic or sometimes it feels a little bit more dated compared to like an iPhone, it's still a cool piece of technology,
Yeah.
right?
And the one thing is, though, is there's so many programs that exist today. You could probably find one if you just Googled it for 5 minutes and Googled your state or Googled your region, and you'd probably find a resource that's out there. And if you can't find it, contact your local MEP, your manufacturing extension partnership, and they probably know who it is. But there's all these different skills, right? When I went down to the Carolinas and I met with Milton over at Shunk, they have a program called NC TAP, North Carolina Tooling Apprenticeship
Yeah.
Program, I think
Yep.
is what it stands for. and they have 10 manufacturers that all work together who created a credit approved apprentice program, for students while they're still in high school to go and learn the basics of, tool building and machine programming. And a lot of people who have graduated from those programs now work for those companies.
That's Milton Jerry at Chunk Work Holding out of Raleigh, North Carolina. I've been to that facility as well. And yeah, they do a great kind of local job of fostering that
Yeah.
talent, right?
And I love their sticker as well. Get paid to learn, or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a completely different mindset that I think when the educational system and student debt and just the cost of living is a lot more volatile these days. There's a lot of like these career opportunities are so well available. It's just we don't do a good job showcasing them.
Very good. So you said a statistic earlier. I just want you to repeat it. So on average, people used to change jobs 3 times. Now it's 11 times. What exactly was that?
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure it's the average number of jobs a baby boomer will have throughout their entire career is 3 different jobs. Not like different job titles, like they could work with that company and then advance within the company. But then the average baby boomer will have 11 different jobs by the time they're 30.
Very cool. And that actually reminds me of our first guest on this podcast. It might be a new potential source for you, Jake. His name is Ben Armstrong from the MIT Workforce of the Future initiative.
Okay.
And Ben has done an incredible broad scale analysis of like what are the true barriers to automation, at least here in the United States. And he kind of found something that reminds me of that statistic, that one of the biggest barriers to adopting and continuously using automation is the atrophy of your product champion. So like, for example, if you want to bring in collaborative robots or something like that, oftentimes you'll invest in one person or a small team to really be the ownership of that new technology and to push that out to the rest of the organization. But what happens a lot is they'll invest a year or two into training these people, and then they'll go across the street to a different company for $1 more an hour. Right. And when you lose that product champion, it actually can cause you to regress pretty significantly on your automation goals. And it does remind me, it's evident of the generations as well, because they typically empower younger people to be these product champions, right?
And it's funny that you mentioned robots. I always hear the story of when you hear robots, people think of job loss and moving, but like I am probably one of the larger advocates out there that I think robots are one of the largest job creators in the industry, and this is my thoughts, right? Tom is trying to continue to keep his business growing, but Tom is having a hard time competing against a lot of manufacturers overseas bidding on the same parts. So Tom needs to reduce his cost in order to keep his 30 other employees employed at his business. So what is he doing? He's leveraging automation to reduce his costs to keep the people who's working for him employed. I think we have this biggest fear that automation robotics takes jobs. Automation robotics is the best common denominator and equalizer to keep manufacturing domestic. And it's one of those things where right now we're at 12.9 to 13 million people working in manufacturing here in the United States. That's probably the highest number we're ever going to see, right? It's never going to, we're never going to all of a sudden have a million more people that enter the workforce in manufacturing. But what's going to be happening though is those jobs are going to become higher skilled, higher valued, higher, I guess you could say, quality of life producing jobs that are going to now be focused on technology and solutions rather than just physical labor. And so it's one of those things where the sooner companies can adopt automation, robotic solutions, or even AI into the business, the longer they're going to be able to stay competitive in a continuously growing economy.
Yeah, we had Jeff Bernstein on as our second guest, and he's
Okay,
a
there
good
you go.
proponent of, he overlays the Bureau of Labor Statistics unemployment rates directly over the International Federation of Robotics install rates, and it's always a strong correlation. More jobs, more robots. That kind of thing, right?
And Jeff's going to say it way better than I ever will.
He,
But it's one of those things where not only does it make companies more productive, it makes them more attractive. And that's the big thing that I push is we need to highlight automation and robotics and cool tech because that's what's going to be drawing in this next generation, right? The next generation learns through technology. They learn through YouTube. There was like 30 million 3D printers sold in the US to households last year, right? People love to tinker. People love to design. People love to build. Think about it. A 3D printer is is a piece of manufacturing equipment, so you have so many of these kids who are picking up Arduino boards or Raspberry Pis and or 3D printers, and they're making stuff or they're programming stuff, yet what they view as manufacturing, they don't see how that can translate into a future job. And like, that's what we need to hit.
Very good. I think that's a great point to kind of transition, Jake, into our speed round here. Thank you for all that you've said so far. We're going to ask you probably 4 or 5 questions. I want to get your hot take, succinct kind of answers on these. So
let's do it.
Ready?
Let's do it.
What book are you currently reading?
I am reading it's a book following a A-10 pilot during his time in the Gulf War, and it is called Hogs in the Sand by Buck Windham.
That's cool. The A-10 is by far the most badass plane.
It's one of the coolest planes. I sat in a cockpit a couple years ago. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah. My brother was a fighter pilot for a brief period in the U.S. military. And it's a cool plane. It's tank in the skies. That's for sure.
Absolutely it is. It's incredible.
Yeah. Cool. What's the secret to perfectly smoking ribs?
Perfectly smoking ribs. I'm glad you asked it smoking and it wasn't grilling. The perfect way to smoke ribs is I call the 3-2-1 method. I think it's the best way to do it, right? For the first 3 hours, you want to take your ribs. You want to make sure you pull off the back strap, the membrane in the back of it, right? I use mustard as a base with a good seasoning. Put it on the smoker, 165, smoke for 3 hours. Then what I do is after 3 hours, I'll wrap it and put it in foil. And in the foil, I'm going to put squeezed butter, some honey, some maple syrup, and some brown sugar, along with a little bit more seasoning on top of it. Wrap it, put it in there for about 2 hours. Let that get up to temp. And then actually more by feel. So what I'll do is I'll pick up the rack and I'll see how much it bends. Because you don't want it too soggy, but you want to make sure it's tender. After that, you take the ribs out of the aluminum, put them back on the smoker. You warm up your barbecue sauce ahead of time. Never put cold barbecue sauce on your ribs before.
There's one thing you take away from this podcast
Never,
today. That's it.
Ever put cold barbecue sauce that you pull out of the fridge and you put it on the ribs. That just kills it, right? You ever wonder why barbecue sauce doesn't stick? You got to get it warmed up. So take barbecue sauce, take a cube of butter, put it in a pan, put it on the smoker, let it heat up, and then brush on the warm barbecue sauce. That's how you'd make some ribs.
I need a video on that soon, Jake.
I'll make one. I'll make one for you.
All right. Next one. We're gonna throw you a curveball here.
Okay.
Keep in mind, I'm in Boston right now,
yeah.
So no preference there. But if you couldn't root for the Cubs, who would you support?
Okay. Does it have to be MLB or can it be like a AAA?
Oh, I guess if you want to go technicality, you can go AAA, but I want to hear both.
Okay. So we'll do pro. If I didn't root for the Cubs, I like the Phillies. I was really I think there's some great people on the Phillies. I was rooting for them this year. I was rooting for them last year. I think Philly's got a great team, and there's some ex-Cubs players on that, which I'd cheer for. Cool. AAA.
I was hoping you were going to say Red Sox, another old school team here in the U.S., but that's okay.
If you have like articles of clothing in your name, are you really that great? And let's face it, the season they didn't do too well this season. It would be, I already rooted for a bad team for decades. I don't need to root for another team that's not doing too hot right now.
All right, last question, Jake. Who would you like to hear on this podcast in the future?
I think Aaron would be Aaron Prather. If you haven't talked to him yet, he's a phenomenal guy. He's talking a lot about standards, and he's got a really fun story of working for FedEx and now working in the standardization for robotics. I think he would be a great guy to have on as well. Of course, I would give another shout out to my buddy Chris Lukey. With Manufacturing Happy Hour, he's got a lot of fun stories, and he could probably share, his journey of interviewing like 150 plus people now in podcasts. He'd be a great one as well.
Cool. Jake, thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of the Reautomated Podcast. We appreciate all of your amazing statistics and perspective on the generational effects in manufacturing and workforce development. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.